I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Do you wear a wearable? I do, and I want to talk about which one I'm wearing right now. But I want to talk about just wearables in general. And what I mean by wearables, it's like your Apple Watch or your Fitbit or something that's giving you some kind of feedback about your health, about your day, about your sleep, about your steps, and how to make a good decision about a wearable and what we think about them. I don't want to talk a ton about the accuracy, although I have some thoughts about that, because I'm not actually sure the accuracy of them totally matters, to be honest. But let's talk through what wearable options there are, why you might get one, and are you actually going to change? I think that's maybe the biggest question is, are you going to change? Because I have had a couple of wearables that I wore for a while and I didn't actually change. And so I want to kind of chat that through. This has to be one of the most common questions I get on social media. So if I ever post an AMA, and if you don't follow me on Instagram, like head over there, because quite often there are some great conversations happening that you might be missing. I'll throw actually my Instagram handle in the show notes so you can whip over there. But it's the most common question that I get asked. Do you love your Oura ring? Because that's my current wearable. Or what do you think about XYZ wearable? And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about it. And in true Jordan fashion, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to get you to ask yourself some really important questions to help you make a decision for yourself. So I think data is cool, right? If you've been around here for a while, you know that I love data. I love being able to contextualize our experience with numbers. I love getting data and using data. And data can mean like what you notice about your experience. That's data. Or it can be hard data that we're tracking or lab work, etc. You know that I love data. But I also am a firm believer that data is only worth collecting if it's important. Data is only worth collecting if it doesn't cause harm collecting it. And sometimes we forget about that, right? That like sometimes doing tests and collecting data actually causes harm. We got to talk about that. And are we actually going to do something with the data? Because if we're not, then it's not worth checking and not worth tracking. And I would start to maybe put it into the harm category or the cost category, that it's costing us something to do this and we're not actually benefiting from it at all. So we need to think about all of those things if you're going to think about getting a wearable. And I know I'm making it sound like it's this massive decision, but the amount of time that people spend thinking about their wearable, checking in on it, feeling good or bad about themselves if they hit all of the goals, it is an important conversation, right? It's like choosing a phone or choosing a device. Like you use it and look at it all the time. I want you to be thoughtful about what you get and reflective. Okay, thoughtful, reflective. Think about it before you buy it and reflect on it if you already have it. That's what we're going to kind of set ourselves up for. So the first question is like, why are you getting one, right? And that must mean that you feel like there's some information about your day or life that you're missing, right? That you can't just gather on your own, or something that you would like to be accountable to or track over time because you have interest in maybe making some change. My very first wearable was a Fitbit, which I got because I wanted to track my steps. And the reason I wanted to track my steps is because there was these big variances between my activity levels on my days. And at that phase of my life, I actually wasn't that active. And so I was going from very low step count on clinic days to kind of also still low step count on non-clinic days. So there was a big difference between my days, but also my overall activity level was quite low. And so my very first Fitbit was to help me increase my steps and have an awareness around my steps. And I like accountability, and it was inexpensive at the time. So at the time, I couldn't afford a trainer. I was at a gym, but there wasn't always the amount of exercise or movement that I needed at that time to stay healthy. So that was why I got it in the first place. And so you need to ask yourself those questions, like, is there information I'm missing? And sometimes we don't realize how different our days are, right? We feel incredibly active on the weekend when we go for a big long hike with our dogs. But then when we actually contrast it against the week and average our activity out over 7 days, it may be that we're not as active as we thought. There may also be some cyclical variation to your sleep or to other aspects that you can track with a wearable that will give you some insight to help you figure out which lever to pull in order to feel better. So you want to ask yourself that question, like, why am I getting it? Is there something about my current health that I'm unclear about that tracking data over time would give me some significant insight about? The other thing you want to ask yourself is about how accountable are you going to be to a device? I think we can get pretty excited about, hitting goals. And if we can get connected to these kind of targets like steps or sleep or whatever it is, that it can help propel us forward to make decisions. If you've set a target for yourself and set a goal for yourself, I'm going to use steps as an example because that was my original reason for getting a wearable. And let's say I wanted to get 10,000 steps, and I'm using that number completely arbitrarily. That is not my target any longer. I'm just saying it. Let's say I wanted to get 10,000 steps. If you are checking in on that data and you're starting to make some connections, right? On Tuesdays and Thursdays, when I saw patients, I was at like 2,000 steps. When we went to COVID, and I never got up from my desk, I got like 900 steps on a work day because I would just sit in my chair and then maybe go to the bathroom after a couple of cups of coffee. But maybe not, because I bookended my day so badly to try and squeeze everybody in that I really didn't leave my chair. So, but if we start to get some of that data, you actually start to see windows of opportunity that you may not have seen before. And that's why goal setting can be so powerful, because when you set a goal of increasing your steps, suddenly you realize that when you're 20 minutes early to pick your kid up from gymnastics and it's still daylight, you can actually do a couple of laps around the block. And if we didn't have that goal, if we didn't have that connection, you might have just sat in the gymnastics center and watched them do their burpees for the last 20 minutes and not done anything for yourself. So I like wearables when we can get connected to the goal, because it helps us start to see these windows of opportunity to support ourselves during our day. You start to see that you should just go to bed instead of scrolling, or you start to recognize that some of the things on your task list today can actually just be done tomorrow, or maybe not at all. But we don't see that if we're not connected to the goal and we're not connected to some kind of collection of information. And a wearable can be quite beautiful for giving you that anchor that you start to construct some goals around, and therefore you start to see solutions. Humans are generally pretty solutions oriented, right? If we give them a problem. That's why we ask you about potential obstacles in your plan before you leave. Because if we say, well, what problems do you see arising in the next 3 months to sticking to your nutrition, your brain starts to scan for challenges, but also it starts to construct solutions. So you'll say, well, actually, my cousin's wedding is coming up, but that's only 1 day, so I'll be okay. Or oh, actually, my office is moving and we're going to be less close to that lunch place that I get my lunch at all the time. I'm going to have to come up with a new idea. We totally construct solutions when we identify the problems. We don't when we feel blindsided by the problem, or we don't even know the problem's there. So that's why the wearables can be quite helpful. But for some goals and for some things, you might not care about getting a little check mark or gold star. Or my old Fitbit like was one of the OGs, used to do like little fireworks, or there would be a rocket ship that would take off on the screen if I hit my step count goal. Like, if that doesn't light your soul on fire to get a little check mark from Peloton or from whoever, you're going to have a hard time connecting your wearable to your actions. And so you really need to ask yourself whether or not, the accountability component of it is going to be meaningful for you. Because if you're not going to change, this is our second question, if you're not going to change, then it doesn't matter for us to collect the data. So I mentioned that I've had a few different wearables, and I was reflecting on the timeline of them so I could try and tell you, like, first I had this one, then I had this one. I actually don't remember the timelines. Just my last one I remember. But I had a Whoop, and I know lots of people who have a Whoop and who love it. It did not work well for me, and it's because I didn't listen to it. And so the phase of life that I got my Whoop in, I was transitioning from CrossFit to powerlifting. So this was back in like 2019, 2018-ish. I was making that transition from doing more CrossFit and endurance style workouts to more strength and powerlifting. My workout schedule was incredibly regimented. And this has actually been one of my keys to success over the years, is that I have particular days that I go. And part of those days were chosen because of my kids. Part of it was the best for my family. Part of it was because of when I commuted into the city, because I live rural. Part of it was based on the class times. Part of it was based on the coaches that were available. So I built this entire calendar of consistency, and I literally have stuck to that same calendar for probably 8 years. I think my first 2 years of CrossFit, I was doing some daytime classes, but my last like 8 years legitimately has been about the same timing of classes. Tuesday at 5, Thursday at 5. Sometimes I'd squeeze a 9 a.m. in on Monday or Wednesday. Friday at 4 used to be in there when I was doing more CrossFit. Saturday morning at 9, Sunday morning at 9. And I've done this exact same timing for legitimately 8 years. So when I got my Whoop, and it was tracking my HRV, it was tracking my heart rate, it was not tracking my steps. So I moved away from the step counting and moved towards like recovery tracking. The problem is the feedback it was giving me was not something I could listen to. So it would say, hey, you overdid it yesterday, don't train today. And when I looked at my calendar, I was like, yeah, I don't have any other options, bracelet. Like, this is when I train. I have to train on this day because of my kids' schedule and my family schedule. And I'm right here next door to the gym. My office is legitimately almost next door to my gym. I have to go. And so what I realized after my first 6 months is that I didn't listen to the feedback that it was giving me ever. I couldn't. It would interrupt my flow. It would mean that overall I exercised less consistently. And the Whoop is about maximizing performance. And all I was trying to do at that phase in my life was perform like relatively well in my life as a 39-year-old person. I wasn't competing. I didn't need to crack some particular PR. I wasn't trying to get on a podium. And if you're trying to do those things, then the 1% difference really maybe does matter. But often when we're talking to weekend warriors and we're looking at performance-based metrics, whether you're 1 or 2% better doesn't matter. And the cost of me following along with this Whoop would have meant less exercise, right? If I had listened to it and I was like, oh shit, my bracelet says I can't exercise on Thursday, I guess I won't go. But then the next day I was able to exercise was a Saturday, I actually would have just exercised less. And I'm not sure that that would have put me any further ahead. So 100%, there are moments when I go to the gym that I'm maybe not recovered from the time before, or maybe I'm a little too tired or I didn't sleep that well. But where I am at in my phase of life, the goal is just to go. Like the goal is attendance. That's what my husband and I say. The attendance is the goal. I'm not trying to be in my peak form. I'm trying to have attendance. And so that particular metric was not helpful for me. And then what I lost by moving to that wearable was I lost tracking my steps. And as I made the transition from CrossFit to more powerlifting, I actually decreased my overall activity, which was not positive for me. It was harder for me to manage my metabolic health when that happened. And I wasn't walking as much and just getting that outdoor enjoyable sort of nature experience. I wasn't tracking my steps. And so I didn't listen to the bracelet and I stopped tracking my steps. The other thing about are you going to listen to it side of the conversation is that I have incredible HRV and heart rate. Incredible. And I don't do anything specifically for that. So probably some of it is just my wiring. Maybe some of it is my long-term dedication to exercise and good nutrition. But I just almost all the time have incredible, and I'm talking HRVs in the 175 to 220 range on average. And my resting heart rate hovers between 37 and 41, 42, unless I'm sick. And so a lot of that feedback was completely unnecessary for me. I'd wake up and look at my HRV and be like, oh, it's in the top 2%. Again, great, thank you. Not helpful, right? So I started tracking and I wasn't going to change because I couldn't change my schedule and I wasn't willing to. I also started tracking metrics that don't matter to me because I don't need to know how perfect my HRV is every day. And I stopped tracking one of the things that actually maybe was helping me, like my steps. So you have to ask yourself that question, are you going to listen? So sometimes when people have really strong beliefs about their sleep patterns, or if they feel like they identify as a night owl, or I'm not going to go to bed any earlier, that's my only me time. Don't get a wearable that tracks your sleep if you're not willing to change, right? Why would you? Don't get a bracelet that you feel like is like your mom saying, take a rest day, Jordan. I just didn't listen to it. So you have to ask yourself that question, am I open to changing? Because if you're not, don't get a wearable that tracks the thing that you're not willing to change. The next question is whether or not it's going to cause harm. And I know this is not one that you've thought of. Is the ring or the watch or the wearable causing harm? And you also could just use the word cost. So if you feel like the word harm is too aggressive, you could use the word cost. What is it costing you to be connected to this data? I always use the word harm. But the way to think about that is that sometimes the guilt or shame or obsessiveness that we have about tracking metrics and data can actually be more detrimental than helpful. And you just need to do some great reflection about that. And that's maybe before you buy, right? You need to ask yourself, how am I going to feel about myself if I realize that my commuting to the big city on a train every day is really influencing both my sleep and my activity levels, but I can't change my job, right? How are you going to feel about that? And so, you have to ask yourself that question. But I definitely have patients where they've been tracking their sleep with a wearable or their HRV with a wearable, and they obsess about changing the number. And I mean, obviously we have to question the accuracy of these things. Like if it says your HRV is 60 and maybe it actually is 70, maybe there's a variance of some kind of error there. Like, would we be happy? Like, why are we so upset about it? And, the more we learn about some of these metrics, I think HRV is a great example. We're seeing it connected to disease and inflammation and long-term health. But what we don't know truly is if you do the thing that helps, on paper is supposed to help HRV, like say meditation, where we know there's like positive outcomes for doing meditation, and your HRV doesn't change. Should you still do the meditation? Like probably, right? Like we probably shouldn't do the healthy behaviors that help long-term health and help overall health, even if your HRV doesn't change. So if you're feeling connected to these numbers and frustrated, and I will often work with people that are like, Jordan, I'm doing it all right and my numbers are still crap. Like that's okay, right? Like you're still doing health behaviors. But when we get into this cycle of feeling disappointed and frustrated about what our wearable says, I don't want that to derail you from doing the right things. So if you feel like the HRV feedback you get every morning is making you feel less inclined to meditate, like that's causing harm, right? Who cares about what your HRV is? You still have to do the meditation. Or if you're feeling stressed or shame around your lack of accountability or ability to stay connected to your plan, and your wearable is really putting a lot of pressure on that, just take it off for a while. There's some seasons of your life that you probably can't hit your step count goal. And so either you need to mentally modify the goal or just take off the damn watch, right? And not be connected to it. I would say where I was having harm caused by my wearable was when I had an Apple Watch. And the reason that it was causing harm wasn't because it was tracking my steps. It was because it gave me too much information. So there were too many other notifications on that particular wearable for me. I already am overly connected to my phone and email, and the Apple Watch was just this additional thing that I was getting way, way, way too much information, notifications. And I know you all say, well, you could turn your notifications off, Jordan. It didn't matter because they could be seen. So even though my phone's on silent, I check it more often than I should, right? And my Apple Watch was the same. I turned off all the notifications or made it so that it wouldn't buzz when I got a text. But because it was right there, I was often looking at it to see if I got a text or to see if there was a notification. So it didn't work for me. Maybe if you turn your notifications off, you feel great about your Apple Watch. I do not feel great about my Apple Watch, so I took it off. And I took it off in COVID and just never put it back on. It was this very freeing moment where I realized I didn't want to track my steps anymore. All I could do was walk. And so when the gyms were closed, and so I stopped tracking my steps. I stopped having my notifications to me. I needed to be disconnected from some of those pieces. And that was really the right thing for me. You may feel positively or negatively about certain aspects of your wearable. Maybe there's things it tells you you don't want to know. Maybe there's things that it's telling you in addition to what you're trying to track. I would say if you want to track your steps, but you hate your Apple Watch, like moving to something that tracks steps but has no other notifications might be a good option. And that's honestly what I did, is I moved to an Oura ring, and that's now what I currently wear. So I went a long time without a wearable. I took my Apple Watch off in 2020, and I did not reconnect with a wearable until the very end of 2022. I bought my Oura ring in December of 2022. So I've been wearing it for about 7 months. The reason I got it is because, so think back to my reflection questions. The reason I got it is because I had a late menstrual cycle. And the Oura ring will track your body temperature, your basal body temperature. And I have not, you know how often I tell people to track their cycle? I don't, or I didn't. very well because it didn't really matter to me. I could kind of know where I was in my cycle when I was in my 30s. I, wasn't, interested in my fertility or any of those pieces. And so I did not track my cycle at all. And then I had a late one. And what I didn't know at the time was whether it was late because I was perimenopausal, right? I was 40, just about to turn 41, or if it was from my nutrition because I'm a weight class masters athlete, which means I occasionally have to cut weight down to compete for Olympic weightlifting. And I had a really difficult weight cut in September and I missed a period. And so I didn't know the difference between whether or not it was from age and stage or if it was from my nutrition. And I wanted to get the Oura ring because it tracks temperature. So does the Apple Watch. And I think the Whoop does now too. But hear me out for a second and I'll tell you why I chose the ring. So that was my initial. So if you go back to my reflection questions, there was something about my health that I didn't know that I needed to get connected with. But I didn't want notifications. I did want step count. I didn't care about tracking my actual exercise, which was one thing that the Whoop did. It tracked my actual exercise. And truthfully, the Whoop said I was under exercising all the time. It thought my powerlifting was nothing. And I think it was probably when I had it years ago when it first came out. It was not as robust at tracking exercise as it is now. At the time, it would say I didn't exercise even though I was powerlifting. And that never felt good. Like it was like, you didn't do enough today, every single day. I didn't want to track my exercise because I'm not interested in tracking my exercise. And so when I started to look at, and I wanted to look at my sleep. Okay, so the lining up of the things I was interested in meant that the Oura ring was the best option. It also honestly is the only wearable I haven't tried. And so I also, just out of personal experimentation, wanted to try this particular wearable. And I had a $50 coupon from a friend. And so it was just the right place, right time. So I've been wearing it for about 7 months. Now, I will say when I first got it, I did not think that I was going to change my sleep. I didn't think I was going to get connected to the sleep metrics on it, which Oura is known for sleep metrics. And so I actually originally thought that when I got it, I just was going to be told that I wasn't sleeping quite enough. And I was going to go, thanks for the info, ring, and then not do anything with it. And that has actually been the opposite. I have become more connected to my sleep and more dedicated to my sleep schedule since getting it. So that has been a pleasant side effect that I did not actually expect, that I'm more connected to my sleep than I was prior to getting it. It does track my steps, and I am happily moving towards a step goal that hovers between like 7,000 and 8,000. I'm pretty happy if I get in that range every day. Since moving to the farm, I moved to a farm in April 2023, last spring. My step count now, I just blow it out of the water every day. And I think it's because honestly, when I take the garbage out, my Oura ring was like, was that a walk? Because I have to walk a couple of acres to take the garbage to the road. So those lifestyle changes, it's neat to be able to watch what happens when you change your environment. But my step count now is a cinch to hit that goal every day. But what I like it for the most is the menstrual data and tracking the cycle. And it's been interesting because since that last missed cycle, I've only had one other one, and it was during another very difficult weight cut this past summer for a competition. And so you can see that like I learned a lot from tracking it, right? I realized that it's dieting that will influence my menstrual cycle. It's not my age. Every other month is like picture perfect, 30 days, no questions asked. The delayed ovulations come when I'm dieting. And so that was a really insightful piece of information for me. And I also know that going into, I turned 42 this coming January, that having this information under my belt is really going to help me when I do start to have some menstrual cycle change as I get older. So I'm pretty happy with that aspect of it. And I have changed my sleep. And so I feel lots of positives from it right now. I would say they're not negatives, they're just neutral, is that my heart rate data and my HRV, like I said before, they're always fine. So that's not information I'm particularly connected to with it. I look at it every day, but it's kind of neither here nor there, because it's always fine, except when I'm sick. And then that's kind of interesting to watch your body like fight to recover from something. I find that kind of fascinating, but that's just neutral data for me. That's not really helping. And so the things I am connected to is my step count, my total sleep time. Those are the things I stay connected to. Do I think it can really tell the difference between my light, deep REM sleep? Of all the wearables, Oura maybe is the more accurate sleep tracker because that's what it's built for. But for me, I'm not looking at that data that granular because I'm not going to do anything about it. It gives me enough information about total sleep time and how long it took me to fall asleep that helps me understand my caffeine intake, etc. But beyond that, I don't really need to know like, oh, was I in deep sleep for like 46 minutes or 57 minutes? That's not changing my life. And so I don't look at it. And so those reflection questions I'm asking you to make is partly to help us understand, like, where do we put emphasis in those tracking pieces? Because I think sometimes the more data we collect, the more confusing it can be. And then we aren't really focusing on the one or two things that are incredibly important for us. So before you throw out your wearable, if now you're like noticing things about it that you're like, actually, this is causing harm, or before you go buy one, you just have to ask yourself those couple of questions. Why am I looking at this? Am I going to change, or can I change right now? Do I need accountability, or will I not give a shit if I get a little check mark at the end of the day? And is there things that it's tracking I don't need to know? And how am I going to feel about that when I get back some metrics that I'm not interested in right now? Ask yourself all of those questions, and that's going to help you choose the right wearable. And for me, I'm very, very happy with my Oura Ring. I take it off when I exercise because I'm not tracking my exercise. But I really do enjoy the metrics that I get back from it. And I do think if you're a menstruating person, especially in your 40s, that having some menstrual feedback, especially if you're not going to track it diligently, like I'm not going to, gives you like some nice background data that can help you contextualize some aspects of your health that can be quite helpful. But you may not even need a wearable, right? If you enjoy movement, if you don't care how many steps you get, you just know you're getting enough, then maybe you don't need something on your body that's giving you this moment-to-moment feedback, right? People were healthy before they had wearables too. It doesn't have to be the path towards health, but I do think they can be quite a valuable thing, especially if you're curious about your patterns and if you're going to listen to it. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.